Hello and welcome to another episode of Two Guys and a Chainsaw. I'm Todd.
And I'm Craig.
Well, we are wrapping up the summer season of films, and it looks like there is at least one horror film on the horizon that I think a number of us horror fans are looking forward to.
I am.
Yeah, me too. And as soon as I saw trailers for it, I thought, oh my gosh, this is almost long overdue, really. It is Stephen King's It. And in honor of that, we thought we would pay tribute to the 1990 television miniseries version of It, which freaked out both of us when we were kids. And we're going to do that with our very first miniseries episodes of the podcast. So because the television show was broadcast in two-hour chunks, which makes for a 4-hour-long movie, but in this case, without commercials, it's really only about 3. We are going to do the first episode tonight on the first half of the television miniseries, and then we will do next week's episode on the second half of the television miniseries, which is handy because the story is kind of broken up into two halves. It's about some kids who conquer an evil or think they've conquered an evil when they're kids, and then are called back to fight it and finish the job as adults. Now, growing up in the 80s, Stephen King's novel It, I believe, came out in 1985, or was it 1986?
I don't know.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was 1985. This was the book that it seemed like everybody around me was reading. It's about a foot thick, I think, and over 1,000 pages. And I think even to date, it is Stephen King's longest novel, and he's not known for writing short books.
Right.
But I remember growing up just this book being everywhere, and I should have read it at that time. I did read the Tommyknockers. I read a lot of Stephen King's books around this time, but I never conquered It for some reason or another. But one thing I did do was watch the television miniseries. And Craig, you can totally back me up on this. Like, again, in the 80s, and maybe earlier than that, but definitely not now, when these sorts of things came on TV, they were like a major event.
Oh, yeah. Huge.
Like, nobody, I mean, everybody and their mother watched this. And you know, it's kind of unequaled today that you would have, like, one thing that everybody from young to old is going to sit down and watch at the same time and talk about the next day. And so when this came on, I watched it, my family watched it, my friends were all watching it, and then everybody was talking about it in school the next day. I remember very distinctly in band practice, our band teacher interrupting. I would have been in 8th grade, I think, and our band teacher interrupting and going, "Did you guys see It last night?" And we were all like, "Yeah." And she just looks at us like, "That is the scariest thing I've ever seen in my life." And I remember it being really freaky. The evil clown thing probably got its start pretty much from this movie. I mean, from this movie on, we all decided that clowns are scary. So, how about your history with It? Do you have any special nostalgic stories to tell?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like any horror fan from our generation has to, this has to be a memory from their youth. And it is of mine. Yes, absolutely. Not only did I watch it, but like it was such a huge build of anticipation leading up to it. Like I was so excited about it. And I remember back in those days when the only method for recording and saving things was VHS. I had a TV in my room, a little tiny, probably like 9 or 12-inch TV in my room, and a VCR. If you wanted to record things, but you didn't want to have to watch the commercials over again later, you had to record, and then you had to pause when the commercials came on, and then you had to remember to unpause when it came back on. And I was so excited about this, and when I was so excited when I was watching it, that there were a couple of times that I would pause it to edit out the commercials, and then I would forget to unpause it when it came back on.
No.
So the VHS recording that I had of It, that I watched over and over and over and over again, had a few scenes missing because I had forgotten. I had forgotten to unpause it after the commercials. And it really wasn't until it, much later that it started re-airing on TV sometimes. And when the DVD came out, which I bought, that some of the scenes were brand new to me because I had watched it so many times. And it was also like my go-to sick day movie. Like if I stayed home from school sick, I would always put this in because it was like nice and long and I could just lay in my bed and watch this movie. And I just remember, I have such fond memories of this movie and I'm so nostalgic about it that even when I was watching it last night, and I've talked about how my partner doesn't really like horror movies, and he particularly doesn't like scary clowns. Like they really freak him out. But he was like, "I'll watch this one with you." I mean, even he, also being our age, it was an event in his life that he remembered, and we sat down and watched it, and we were watching it, and I just remember saying to him last night, all right, fine. All these people now who are saying that the movie is out of date, that it hasn't, really stood the test of time. I get what they're saying, but I don't care. It's a made for TV movie and it feels like a made for TV movie from the 80s or early 90s rather. But despite some of its flaws and despite its budget and the fact that it was made for TV, I really feel like there's something special going on here, especially in this first part. There's something about these kids, these actors, and they're young actors, and they're not brilliant actors by any stretch of the imagination, but you really get the feel. And I've read the book too. I also didn't read the book until I was an adult. Only in the past couple of years did I read the book. But I feel like these kids really capture something special. And I think that's what's special about the book too, is that it really captures that feeling of childhood and the friendship that you have as a kid and the special bonds that you have. That's something really special and powerful and something that you never forget, despite the fact that you may go your own separate ways, you grow up, you leave childhood behind, there are those special bonds that you have with your childhood friends that are so powerful. And I thought that the book captured that well. And I thought that the first half of the movie captured that well. We only watched the first half last night. I haven't watched the second half yet, so I don't know how I'll feel about that one in retrospect. But this one, despite perhaps many flaws, I'm so nostalgic for it, and I freaking love it.
Well, it's a nostalgic book, and really, I just finished reading the book 5 hours ago. Like, it's funny that we're doing this because as the brand new movie was coming out, I thought, oh my gosh, that is a book that's been on my list forever. I really need to check that out. And my wife and I were flying back to the States, and so on our 12-hour flight, you're always looking for something to do and some reading material. And so I was determined, when we go back to the States, I'm going to find a used bookstore. I'm going to get the mass market paperback version of it, and I'm going to read it on the way back. And it is, I did. I read it almost 12 hours straight on the plane, and I don't even know if I hit the halfway point. That's how long it was. Yeah. By the time I was done with the book, I was kind of sick of it, but it really taps those same chords. I mean, the whole theme, really, of the story is about nostalgia, is about your childhood, about how you are going to forget about your childhood, too. That is a common thread, and all these things are really just sort of touched on in the movie because they have to be. You can't. Apparently, ABC it was originally proposed to the network to do an 8-parter instead of just a 2, right? And they were nervous about doing something that long, which is
and it was supposed to be directed by Romero too.
Imagine
which would have been cool. Yeah, I imagine that exactly.
Well, there's so much that they gloss over, but it's interesting to see how they slip in little hints of things that they ended up glossing over into the movie. But by the time you're done, really, one of the threads that go, and I'm interested too because it's been a while since I've seen this, and like you, I didn't go on to see the second part yet. I stuck to our bargain, and And I'll be interested to see if that aspect of the book, which is so strong, is carries through in the whole miniseries. And that is the fact that when these guys are called back as adults, one of the main things in the book is that they have pretty much forgotten about this whole major traumatic episode that happened to them as kids.
Right.
And it's really becomes a metaphor for the fact that as a child, you have all of these life-changing experiences and you have friends and everything is such a big deal to you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everything that
Yep,
happens.
yep.
And by the time you're an adult, even by the time you're your 20s or your 30s, you look back and you can hardly remember any of it. You know it
Right.
had an impact on you. You know it shaped who you are. But by golly, if you can pinpoint, 3 or 4 episodes of what actually, you did.
Yeah.
And let alone, keep touch with your friends or remember your friendships at all. It's really cool. So then when you see a movie like this, it does tend to stir up those kind of... It's like Stand By Me, It's
Yes.
It just stirs up those memories that were long dormant in your own self of childhood. And like, oh, yeah, I remember we had adventures like this, And to us, like the idea of building a dam in the creek was like a cool thing to do. Could spend all day doing it and talking about it and then feel proud about it when we were done.
I know, and at the risk of sounding like an old guy, which I realize that I'm getting old. I've accepted it's cool, but whatever. But it's nostalgic also because I see kids today, and I'm sure kids today are doing things that I don't know about. But when we were kids, we didn't have iPads and we didn't have all these things that to distract us, bazillions of channels on TV, Netflix, where, anything that you want on demand. We didn't have that stuff so much. So we went outside and,
Yeah.
we rode our bikes and we went and played in the dirt and played in the creek or at the pond or whatever. And I think that's part of the reason that I'm nostalgic for this too, because it just highlights a different kind of childhood that I wonder if kids are experiencing today. And if I'm sure times change, times have always changed. I'm sure kids have their own special memories these days that I just can't particularly relate to. But going out with your friends, riding your bike, going down and doing something like building a dam, down in the Barrens or whatever, like these kids do. I have these memories from childhood, and it's just... I don't know. It's so nostalgic. I could go on about it for days, but that would be super boring. So,
well,
we should talk about the movie.
Do we have to? I just want to say, Craig, I know what you're talking about, but again, we're always on guard of sounding like the old guy down the street. But I think you're kind of onto something there, because as teachers and in the education field, and you and I are pretty exposed to kids nowadays, something has changed. You gotta point it out. And it's not the kids' fault.
No.
We've talked about just the world and how people seem to be a little more protective of children now than they used to be. And they're a little more coddling of children than they used to be. And so the idea that a parent would let their kids roam free to run around and do these things that these kids do, kind of like we did before, is sort of a lost concept. I can't really see, if you were to compare Derry, which is the town that this happens in, to modern day today. And Derry's 1950s, but it wasn't a huge jump from 1958, I think, to 1988. Really,
no.
In the freedom that these kids were given to run around the town. But this town is a cursed town. And again, it's way more obvious in the book than it is in the show, and maybe that is one of my biggest criticisms of the movie. Again, you can only fit so much in, but the one thing that the book has that the movie clearly doesn't have is just this sense that it's not just this fantastic evil creature that lurks in the sewers that these kids have stumbled upon, but it's the creature that lives in the sewers of this town that has lived there for forever. And it has his tentacles and things into the entire town, so that even the adults in the town kind of tend to turn a blind eye. They don't want to. It's just in their nature to turn a blind eye to the evil and the bad things that exist kind of below the surface of this town. That really doesn't come through in this miniseries at all. You don't get a sense of that. It's trying, but it doesn't really happen.
Well, and I think, adapting this to the screen, I think would pose a challenge to anybody. And I'll be really interested to see. I'm excited about the remake. The truth of the matter is, when they announced the remake, I was both excited and skeptical because I think that it's difficult material to translate because there's so much mythology in the book.
Yes.
That would just be so. Again, those of you who haven't read the book, this will mean nothing to you. That's fine. Skip to the next part of the podcast. But like, there's stuff with a giant mystical turtle, and there's stuff with like the ritual of Chud, and like all this weird metaphorical stuff that really would be very difficult to translate to the screen. And I'll be interested to see how the new one handles all that stuff. There's also there's content in the book that is just so off.
I know what you're talking about.
You chuckle. You know what I'm talking about.
Oh, yeah.
There's content in the book that like is questionable even in the book, and that you certainly couldn't translate into film. I don't think successfully ever. Not even in 2017 when our sensibilities are very different. So I what I thought that the miniseries did well was that, whether you had read the book or not, first of all, it was an entertaining movie. But if you had read the book, it did try to, like, what my partner noted last night when we were watching it was that it was really fast paced, like boom, 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 boom.
Yeah.
Like getting a lot of content into a very relatively small span of time. But having read the book, I appreciated that. I appreciated nods to the book, and I appreciated them trying to get as much content from the book as they could. Again, who did Stephen King adapt this? Did he write the script?
Nope, he didn't. He had very little to do with the creative process of the miniseries. Yeah.
Well, what I read today was that the director, Tommy Lee Wallace, hadn't even read the book when he made the movie. At the time he said that he wanted the script to speak for itself. He wanted, just to focus on the content of the script and not worry about the book. He read the book later, and then later on said that he wished that he had read it before he made the movie, because he felt ultimately that the movie didn't do just service to the book, which I can understand from a certain perspective. But knowing that he hadn't read the book, I'm really kind of impressed at how much of the content of the book they were able to get into this, even if, with commercials and everything in a miniseries, even if it's 3 hours and 15 minutes or whatever, they did a pretty darn good job. I think it's a pretty good adaptation, literary adaptation.
And I think King was pretty happy with it, and he's notoriously not happy with a lot of the adaptations of his work, and sometimes for very good reason. And he said he thought they did a pretty good job with it. For him, that's pretty good.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about the movie. Okay. And you talked about how you had started the book, or no, maybe, I don't know if you had started it or not, but my experience was, as a child, I don't know, 13, 14, I had started it several times, and I couldn't get past the first 30, 40 pages, because all I remember, the first 30, 40 pages were about these very stereotypically drawn homosexual guys getting killed. And like, it was graphic, and it I don't know, even at that point in my life when I didn't even know who I was. It was just unsettling to me for some reason, and I never got through it. I got over it eventually.
It is unsettling. Actually, the book is very fresh in my mind, obviously, and I was blown. The first several pages were very bothersome to me, and I was also surprised at the thematic material of it. It just kind of seemed very modern to even have that as subject matter, with this sort of hate crime.
Right.
It seems like something an author nowadays would consciously put in a book because they're trying to make a statement. And here's Stephen King back in the 80s, before this was really bubbled up to our high level of consciousness.
We are going to have a hard time keeping this an hour. If we... Okay, so the movie, after those opening credits, and we see in the opening credits a scrapbook with old pictures,